haven, preserving the eternal annals of Warhammer.
Beneath a galaxy of dimming suns, where the light of dying stars flickers like the last breaths of forgotten gods, there drifts an empire built of whispers. It is here, on the edge of the Persian abyss, that signals slip between the bones of dead constellations, carrying orders written in a cipher no loyal soul can read. Fleets, once proud, now rest, as skeletal silhouettes, their hulls covered in frost and silence, their banners cut away long ago. The void itself seems to murmur a name never spoken aloud, Alpha Legion, the ghost of a legion that does not exist except in the wake of vanished worlds. This is not the birth of a saga, but its echo. And yet, even now, we draw close, leaning in to listen. We truly love and care for you, and before we begin the story, tell us, where in the world are you watching from? And what time is it there? Now let's get started. In the shadow of a collapsed star fortress called Nymeth's Vale, a single vessel drifts with all its lights dimmed. Within its labyrinthine decks, a figure walks alone through corridors lined with shuttered data vaults and sealed armories. His face is a secret even to his own reflection. His name has been worn smooth by centuries of masks. To some, he is Alfarius. To others, a rumour, a cipher. He carries immortality like a wound, remembering wars that no archive dares to record. Around him, the air tastes of copper and ozone, the scent of machinery preparing for an operation never meant to be seen. Beyond the viewing ports, the galaxy turns like a dark serpent swallowing its own tail. Worlds fall and rise again under different flags, alliances breaking and reforming without a single battle fought. This is his art, control without conquest, domination by suggestion rather than steel. But tonight the cold weight in his chest deepens. For every success lies a question. If the Hydra shapes everything, does anything still have meaning? He stands before a long hololithic table, its surface alive with shifting constellations, each point of light a cell, a pawn, a voice. One by one he touches them, feeling not pride but ache. An encoded transmission blooms before him like a pale flower. It is an invitation, but also a test. A senator from a loyalist world offering secret negotiations. Accepting means risking exposure, but refusing could destroy months of silent manipulation. His hands hover over the reply, gloved fingers trembling imperceptibly. Immortality has not dulled his fear. If anything, it has sharpened it, the way a blade grows thinner with every sharpening stroke. He thinks of the operatives scattered across the galaxy, men and women who have surrendered their names to become fragments of the Hydra. He thinks of the cost of secrecy, of cells erased when compromised, of families who never know why their kin vanish. He moves to the observation deck. Through the reinforced glass, the ruins of Nymeth's Vale stretch like a cathedral gutted by fire. Rusted pylons rise toward a sky devoid of stars, their spires etched with forgotten oaths. The silence is not empty, but heavy, as if every echo carries a memory of what was lost. Alfarius places his palm against the glass. In the reflection, his own eyes look back at him, but for a heartbeat, they seem to belong to someone else. His twin, perhaps, or the Legion itself. "How many more masks can I wear?" he whispers, though no one hears. Below, hidden hangar bays awaken. Black hulls uncloak like shadows moving beneath a lake. These are not warships but envoys, crafted to resemble the vessels of enemies and allies alike. Each carries a different crest, a different identity. They are instruments of a new bargain he is about to forge. The Alpha Legion does not march into battle. It seeps into the cracks of history, rewriting events from within. But this time, the stakes feel different. The envoy waiting at the far end of the spiral arm is not a petty governor or rogue Mechanicus priest, but a warlord whose defection could tilt an entire segmentum into chaos or stability, depending on which side one calls the Hydra's true face. Alpharius closes his eyes and breathes deeply. In his mind he sees the endless coils of his plan, threads of manipulation stretching across decades, converging here. Yet among the patterns, a fissure, doubt, creeping like frost. Was it for the Imperium's survival that he began, or for his own unspoken hunger to be the unseen architect? Memory unspools, his first oaths to unity, his earliest lies told for the greater good. Each one felt necessary at the time. Each one now tastes of ash. He wonders how many of his operatives still believe, or whether belief itself has become another mask. A chime breaks his thoughts. A shadowed figure steps into the deck. A courier, face concealed behind a mirrored visor. Without a word, the courier kneels and offers a sealed data crypt. Alpharius takes it, feeling its cold weight. The seal bears no insignia. He knows at once it comes from a cell that should not exist, one formed without his sanction. This means two things. Someone inside his labyrinth is moving pieces beyond his reach, and the Hydra may have grown heads he cannot count. Inside the crypt lies a single line of text. Meet me where the stars drown. No coordinates, no name. He turns back to the void. Far below, a dying star pulses once, twice, then goes dark. It feels like an omen. Yet he sets his jaw, tucking the crypt beneath his cloak. The envoy ship's engines flare as it detaches, sliding silently into the abyss. He will follow. He must. Somewhere out there a new bargain waits, one that could decide the fate of empires or unmask every secret at once. Behind him, the courier dissolves into the crowd of shadows, and Alpharius feels the first true shiver of unease in centuries. The Hydra moves, but he no longer knows which way its head faces. The ship's interior lights dim to blood red as departure protocols engage. Alpharius stands alone in the command chamber, hands clasped behind his back, watching the galaxy wheel slowly. Every star a possibility, every darkness a trap. He recalls the training halls where recruits were taught that the Alpha Legion is unity, 1,000 selves acting as one. But unity has become a myth, a story told to operatives before they vanish into the deep. He whispers a silent oath, to truth or to deception, he cannot tell. The engines hum like distant thunder, and the vessel glides forward deeper into shadow, toward the first meeting of a deal that should never exist. He knows, as all immortals know, that nothing lasts forever. Not empires, not loyalty, not even secrecy. Yet he moves anyway, drawn by a mixture of duty, curiosity, and an ache he cannot name. Outside, the void closes around him like a serpent's coil. Inside, the man called Alpharius feels his resolve tighten, even as it begins to crack. Somewhere ahead lies the envoy, the bargain, and perhaps the moment when the Alpha Legion's masks will be stripped away. He breathes out once, a sound lost to the hum of the ship, and steps into the darkness, carrying the weight of a legion built on whispers. Shadows gathered like liquid mercury within the amphitheatre buried beneath a hollow moon, where no star ever pierced the stone sky. Here, in a place built before the Imperium even had a name, a council convened without banners or heralds. The seats were arranged in concentric circles of obsidian, each polished surface reflecting its occupant as a smear of darkness. None looked directly at another. Every figure wore a mask wrought from alien alloys, some etched with runes, some blank as tombstones. At the center, a pool of black water rippled with coded light, and above it hung a globe of pale fire, one of the last data cores salvaged from Ninth's Veil, pulsing with encrypted whispers. This was the place where alliances were woven like spider silk, and where betrayals gestated unseen. Alpharius entered without ceremony. His steps made no sound on the obsidian floor, yet the masked assembly shifted imperceptibly. The Hydra had no throne, but even a creature of 1,000 heads must look somewhere for its heart. He stood at the edge of the black pool, feeling the weight of 1,000 eyes that did not meet his. To some of these cloaked shapes, he had offered promises of freedom, to others secrets, to still others threats whispered in their dreams. All believed they were alone in their pact with the Alpha Legion. None imagined they were one coil among many. In his mind, Alpharius recalled the faces behind those masks, the warlord of a splinter fleet who fancied himself a liberator, the Mechanicus heretic seeking forbidden STC fragments, the human senator who had promised to undermine the High Lords. Each of them had been courted separately, each convinced they were the pivot of his design. Yet now, as their coded voices rose in turn, he felt the tremor of unease. How long can a web hold when every strand believes itself the center? His own operatives had begun to whisper doubts, questioning the endless duplicity. The Hydra thrived on secrecy, but secrecy had begun to eat its own tail. A robed delegate stepped forward, mask carved into a bird of prey. "We have fulfilled your requests," the voice modulated, genderless. "The orbital docks of Zir are yours. Our fleets await your signal." Another delegate, mask of beaten bronze, hissed from across the circle. "And yet our convoys vanish. Someone bleeds us in the dark. We demand answers." The black water between them flickered with coordinates of lost ships, each blinking out like dying stars. Alpharius felt a pulse of irritation. He had arranged those losses to push them closer to his embrace, but their suspicion came sooner than expected. He raised one gloved hand. "Each of you believes you stand alone. You do not. You are threads in a tapestry you cannot yet see. The galaxy shudders on the brink of a war none of you can win. Only through us, through unity unseen, will your causes survive." His voice was soft, but it carried like a blade sliding free of a sheath. Beneath his words lay coded signals that laced the Council's implants, subtle hypnotics to ease tension. But as he spoke, he caught a flicker in the pale fire above the pool, a counter-signal, brief as a heartbeat, like a serpent's tongue darting between his own syllables. Someone else was speaking through his voice. The realization chilled him. A cell outside his control had infiltrated even this. The courier's crypt from the Veil, "Meet me where the stars drown," returned to his mind like a phantom ache. He suppressed the reaction, letting his posture remain serene. "Masks within masks," he reminded himself. "The Hydra teaches patience." Yet beneath that mantra rose a darker question. If the Hydra has learned to mimic its master, what remains of the master? A mechanical bell tolled deep within the amphitheatre. The session ended. Delegates rose and filed out through secret tunnels, each believing they had extracted some advantage. When the last had gone, the hall fell into a silence thick as dust. Alpharius lingered by the black pool. The pale fire of the data core dimmed, leaving only his reflection in the water, indistinct, fractured, a dozen silhouettes overlapping. He knelt, touched the surface. It rippled outward, scattering his image into uncountable shards. Footsteps approached behind him. Without turning, he spoke. Report. A figure emerged from the shadows. A senior operative, armor painted in a deep sea green that drank the dim light. His helm under one arm revealed a face drawn taut with exhaustion. This was Irene, one of his oldest agents, trained in the first halls of the Legion. Cells 19 through 24 request extraction, she said. Too many conflicting orders. They think they're fighting themselves. Her voice cracked slightly. Sir, morale is... She hesitated, searching for a word the Legion had no use for. Fraying. Alfarius rose slowly. Morale is a story we tell to soldiers who think they have names, he said. We deal in outcomes, not feelings. Yet even as he spoke, he felt the hollow in his own words. He remembered training Erin when she was still a mortal girl, full of conviction. He wondered who she thought she served now, the man before her, or the Hydra itself. She stepped closer. What is the plan, my lord? Some of us, we no longer know if we are the knife or the hand holding it. Her eyes searched his, and he felt a flicker of something dangerously close to guilt. Tell me there's an end to this. He almost answered, almost told her of the prophecy glimpsed in hidden archives, of an imperium rotting from within, of his belief that only by threading every faction with his own agents could the collapse be slowed or steered. But the words would not come. The Hydra cannot confess. Instead, he touched her shoulder briefly, a gesture that felt like both reassurance and farewell. Hold the lines, Irene. Trust in the design. She nodded, but he saw in her face the birth of a question she would never voice. She turned and vanished into the tunnels, leaving him alone with the rippling pool. Above, the data core flickered once more. This time, the message was clearer, etched in light across the black water. Coordinates in the halo stars, a system long thought dead. Beneath them, a phrase repeated. The first head rises. Alfarius stared at the words until they faded. A cell declaring itself independent. A head of the Hydra seeking its own crown. The thought stirred something like admiration and dread in equal measure. He left the amphitheater through a hidden door that led directly to his personal launch bay. The corridor smelled of cold iron and oil, the scent of machines poised for betrayal. As he walked, memories pressed against him. Wars fought under false banners, allies broken to preserve deeper secrets, the faces of operatives who had died never knowing whose plan they served. He had told himself it was all necessary, but necessity, like immortality, corrodes. At the bay his ship waited, a vessel with no name and 1,000 transponders. Its hull shimmered faintly, adapting to whatever identity he required. He paused at the foot of the ramp, looking up into the darkness beyond. Somewhere at the edge of the halo stars, a challenge awaited, a reflection of his own methods rising against him. He felt the weight of decision pressing on his shoulders, whether to crush the rogue cell, co-opt it, or perhaps let it grow as a mirror of himself. He stepped aboard, the hatch sealing with a hiss like a serpent's breath. In the command chamber, screens bloomed with star maps, each route a possibility. He reached out, selected the coordinates from the message, and watched as the engines warmed to a low growl. Outside, the hollow moon receded, its amphitheater sinking back into secrecy. Inside, Alfarius stood alone, a man who had built an empire of hidden deals, now feeling the first tremor of its revolt. As the ship accelerated into the void, he allowed himself a single whispered thought. Perhaps the Hydra has always been more than me. The words were swallowed by the hum of the drives. Ahead lay the drowned stars, the first head rising, and the beginning of a reckoning no mask could prevent. The vessel drifted on silent engines through a corridor of starless black, its hull disguised as a freighter but pulsing faintly with hidden codes. Inside, Alfarius sat alone in a chamber built like a chapel of steel, walls lined with data scrolls and memory crystals, whose light flickered like votive candles. He had ordered the ship sealed, crew replaced by servitors, every corridor scrubbed of insignia. Here, at last, there were no masks but his own. Yet even in solitude the Hydra's whisper coiled around him, reminding him that anonymity is never a refuge, but a mirror. He reached for a crystal marked only with a sigil of 3 intersecting circles. It held the first oaths of the Legion, words he had not read in centuries. As the holographic script unfolded, he remembered the training vaults of Chemos, the drills of discipline and unity, the vision of a legion that could outthink any foe. He remembered the moment when immortality was not a curse but a promise, to live long enough to ensure the Imperium's survival. How far those ideals had decayed. His operatives now lived as ghosts, shifting between names, their true faces erased. Some had begun to ask questions, some had begun to defect. A soft chime broke his reverie. The ship's augurs had intercepted a burst transmission, encrypted Hydra code but inverted, like a reflection in dark water. He played it. A woman's voice, low and steady, emerged from static. We served without names, we served without hope, but the coil tightens around nothing. The Hydra feeds on itself. It was Irene. She had switched to a forbidden cipher, one used only to signal insurrection. Alfarius closed his eyes. The operative he had trained, trusted, had crossed a line. He rose and walked to the viewing port. Beyond stretched the halo stars, not glittering but dull, as if their light had been bled away. In the distance, the rogue cell's coordinates pulsed faintly, a derelict station orbiting a world of ash. He should have felt anger or resolve. Instead, a strange weariness filled him. Each betrayal was a blade he had sharpened himself. Had he not taught them to question, to adapt, to infiltrate? A serpent that learns to think may also learn to bite its master. The ship slid into the debris field of the ash world. Wreckage floated like frozen tears. Shattered hulls of forgotten wars, statues of angels cracked at the wings, burned banners of empires no one remembered. As Alfarius guided the vessel through the graveyard, fragments of old transmissions whispered from the wrecks. Oaths, prayers, curses, ghost voices echoing the choices that had led here. The symbolism was not lost on him. He felt as though he was sailing through the ruins of his own intentions. He activated a secure channel to his inner council. Only 3 icons appeared, shadows of his most trusted lieutenants. Their voices overlapped, each distorted. "Cells are collapsing," said the first. "Your name is being used to justify contradictory orders," said the second. "Loyalty is fracturing," said the third. Alfarius listened, feeling each word as a weight on his spine. "Hold the network together," he told them. "No public strikes, no purges yet." He cut the line before they could reply. Even trust had become a liability. Descending to the lower decks, he entered the chamber where his armor waited. Plates of sea-green ceramite etched with 1,000 tiny hydras, each head biting its own tail. He had not worn it openly in decades. As servitors locked the pieces onto him, the weight felt both alien and familiar, like an old lie retold. In the mirrored surface of his gauntlet, he saw his own face refracted into a dozen expressions: anger, fatigue, resolve, all of them true and none complete. The ship docked with a derelict station, a structure of black iron and cracked glass shaped like a spiral. No welcoming lights, only silence. Alfarius stepped onto the airless causeway, each footfall echoing faintly through his armor. Inside the station, the corridors twisted like a labyrinth, walls scratched with messages in dead languages. He passed rooms filled with dust and shattered icons, glimpsing shapes that might have been shadows or memories. At the heart of the station lay a chamber of scorched stone, open to the void through a cracked dome. Stars, or what passed for them, gleamed faintly above. In the center stood Irene, her armor stripped of markings, helmet at her feet. Her face was pale but steady. Around her knelt a dozen operatives, also unmarked, their weapons laid down. Alfarius stopped at the threshold. She spoke first. "We gave everything, names, lives, faith. We believed there was a plan, but the plan has become the purpose. We fight ourselves, and the galaxy burns anyway. Tell us, Alfarius, what is left to believe?" Her words were not an accusation shouted, but a question weighed down by years of silence. He stepped forward slowly, the station groaning under unseen tides. "You think I do not ask myself the same," he said. "Every day I walk among shadows, wondering if any light remains. I began to save the Imperium. I shaped chaos to avert a greater chaos. But the pattern has no end. Perhaps it never did." His voice was low, almost lost in the hiss of leaking air. Orion's eyes flickered, then ended. "Give us truth, or release us." For a moment he considered it, telling them everything, confessing the prophecy, the manipulation, the endless double games. The Hydra could die here, cut apart by its own heads, and perhaps something new might rise. But behind his eyes flared visions of other futures, cults unchecked, alien warlords unopposed, humanity splintering without the invisible hand that had steered it for centuries. Could he gamble the galaxy on one moment of honesty? He moved closer until only the cracked dome separated them from the void. "You are my best," he said softly. "The ones who see the cracks first. That is why I sent you here." Erin frowned. "Sent?" "Yes," he whispered. "To test how far the Hydra could stretch before it broke. To see if any of you would still believe in the idea beyond me." It was not entirely true, nor entirely false. In Alfarius's world, nothing was. A tremor shook the station, dust falling like grey snow. From the shadows beyond the chamber, shapes moved, armoured figures with weapons half raised. Operatives from other cells, drawn by conflicting orders, now converging in the same place. Confusion flickered across their visors as they recognized one another. The Hydra had gathered itself without knowing why. Alfarius lifted his helm and sealed it, his voice amplified, calm but edged with steel. "Lay down your doubts. You are still Legion." Some hesitated, some obeyed, some raised weapons higher. In that instant, he felt the full weight of anonymity, the impossibility of commanding loyalty from people who do not even know who they are. He realized the Hydra might already be beyond his control, a living organism evolving in secret. Perhaps it had never been his to command. Another tremor. The cracked dome above them split further, stars spilling their cold light across the floor. Alfarius looked up and saw his reflection multiplied 1,000 times in the broken glass, each image a different man. The sound of weapons being readied echoed like distant thunder. He lowered his hand slowly. "Then choose," he said. "Be the knife, or be the hand." No one moved at first. The silence was total, the stillness of a breath held before the plunge. In that frozen moment, Alfarius felt a curious calm, He had built an empire of secrets. Now the secret stood before him, demanding reckoning. Beyond the dome, the halo stars flickered like dying embers, and somewhere in their light, he thought he glimpsed the shape of a serpent coiling, ready to strike, not at him, but through him, into a future he could no longer predict. The station had not truly ended when the chamber cracked. It had simply shifted into a deeper layer of silence. Alfarius felt it as soon as the tremor ceased, the sense of a labyrinth unfolding around him, every corridor a memory of something planted long ago. He left the gathering without a backward glance, his footsteps swallowed by the hiss of leaking air. Behind him, the operatives remained in their standoff, weapons low but not lowered, like statues awaiting a sculptor's decision. The Hydra had always been an organism of waiting. Now it had begun to wait for itself. He moved through corridors lined with dust-slick consoles and dead hololiths. Here, hidden beneath the station's surface, lay one of the Legion's oldest seed vaults, a repository not of weapons, but of ideas. Alfarius had built it as a testbed for influence campaigns, a vault of stories, forged documents, and coded myths ready to be released into the galaxy when needed. It was the heart of his real war, fought not with bolters, but with whispers. Each cell in the vault contained a meme, a prophecy, a rumor, germs of thought meant to infiltrate and reshape entire cultures. As he passed the rows of sealed containers, the faint glow of their indicators flickered like embers of an unseen fire. He stopped at a particular capsule marked with a Hydra whose heads curled inward. This one had not been opened in centuries. Inside lay the first seed he had ever crafted, a doctrine of unity through secrecy, planted in a rebel cluster to bind them into a covert network loyal to no banner. That network had blossomed, overthrown tyrants, and then quietly turned into another tyranny. Alfarius touched the capsule. The metal was cold as a tomb. He wondered if he was still planting seeds or only harvesting weeds. Beyond the vault, a narrow passage led to the station's external pods, small stealth craft used for infiltration. His plan had been to retrieve dormant operatives hidden on nearby worlds. But now, with Erin's defiance and the convergence of cells, he saw another purpose. Perhaps he could still guide this uprising, weave it back into his design as he had so many betrayals before. Perhaps the word tasted of rust. He keyed a code into the wall. A section of floor slid aside to reveal a recessed chamber where a single pod waited, sleek and black, its canopy etched with coiling sigils. As he descended, his mind replayed the council on the hollow moon, the masked delegates speaking in riddles, the pale flicker of a counter-signal inside his own speech. For the first time in centuries, he did not know whether he was the instigator or the target of a manipulation. The Hydra's reflection had become indistinguishable from himself. Sealed inside the pod, he launched into the void, away from the station's carcass. The stars rolled slowly, dull and red at their edges. His destination was not another council or battlefield, but a hidden garden world on the edge of the halo stars, a place where the Legion had planted something stranger than spies. There, among alien ruins, they had left conceptual sleepers, cultures nurtured from birth to hold certain beliefs, waiting for a signal to rise. Alfarius had once believed these experiments brilliant. Now they felt like chains forged out of dreams. As the pod cut through the darkness, he accessed its archives. Images of the garden world unfolded in ghostly light. Emerald jungles under a cracked sky, rivers shaped like coiled serpents, cities built to resemble, Labyrinths. The population believed themselves free, but every custom, every story, had been seeded by Legion operatives generations ago. It was a living demonstration of his method, infiltration so deep it became identity. Now, with the Hydra fracturing, he feared these sleepers might awaken to no master at all. He landed at night, the pod sinking into a marsh that glowed faintly with bioluminescent spores. The air was heavy with the scent of wet stone and alien blossoms. Above, 2 moons hung like the eyes of a predator. Alfarius moved through the foliage without lights, his armor shifting to mimic the jungle's hues. He could feel the pulse of the sleepers around him, millions of minds shaped by his hidden hand. If they turned, they could become a weapon or a contagion. He had come to decide which. In the heart of the jungle stood a temple grown from living stone. Its walls spiraled upward in a pattern that mirrored the Hydra's sigil. Inside, murals depicted myths the Legion had invented. Heroes who wore masks, serpents who whispered salvation, enemies always faceless. Alfarius walked beneath these painted lies, his footsteps echoing softly. In the inner sanctum, he found an altar bearing a sealed casket. When he opened it, a faint pulse of light rose, projecting a map of the sector. Lines of influence radiated from the garden world like roots. At their center was a single glyph he had not placed, a serpent biting not its tail, but a human hand. He stared at the glyph. Somewhere within the sleepers, a counter-myth had emerged, a story of the Hydra devouring its creators. It was subtle, almost invisible, but he saw its pattern in the map's lines. Communities he had seeded now linked by a new signal, not his own. Someone, perhaps a Rincel or some deeper faction, had infiltrated the sleepers as he once had, turning his own weapon back upon him. He knelt by the altar, placing one palm on the cool stone. Memories of his earliest victories flooded back. Systems toppled without a shot fired, rivals undone by whispers. He had thought himself untouchable, a mind behind every curtain. Now the curtain had parted, and he was only another figure on the stage. The realization was not defeat, but a strange clarity, as if the labyrinth's walls had briefly gone transparent. From the temple's doorway came the sound of movement. Figures emerged from the jungle, locals draped in serpentine cloth, eyes glowing faintly with implanted augers. They knelt, murmuring a chant he did not recognize. Their leader, a woman with a mask of carved bone, raised her head. "We dreamed of you," she said, "but we also dreamed of your ending." Her voice carried no malice, only inevitability. Alfarius rose slowly. "Who taught you that dream?" "The dream taught itself," she replied. "Seeds grow in darkness, but they also spread." For a moment he considered drawing his blade, silencing them, burning the garden world to ash. It would be easy, an old reflex. Yet as he looked at their faces, he saw not rebellion, but evolution. The Hydra had always been about adaptation. Perhaps this was its next form, beyond him, beyond control. He turned from the altar. "Then you know why I am here," he said, "and you know what I must decide." The woman inclined her head. "We know, but the decision is yours alone." Outside, the jungle pulsed with unseen life, each flicker of bioluminescence, a heartbeat of a culture he had engineered and now barely understood. Alfarius stepped into the night, the chants fading behind him. The moons hung lower, their light silvering his armor. For the first time in centuries, he felt neither hunter nor puppet master, but something in between, a gardener walking through a field that had grown wild. He paused at the edge of a cliff, where the jungle fell away to a river coiling like a vast serpent. In the water's reflection, his face blurred, splitting into multiple selves. He whispered to it, not as a command, but as a confession. Seeds in the dark, and now the dark seeds me. The wind carried the words away. Behind him, the sleepers waited, their future unwritten. Ahead, the Hydra's coils tightened towards some unknown convergence. Alfarius descended the cliff, vanishing into the foliage, already feeling the next betrayal forming like a storm at the horizon. Beneath the twin moons of the garden world, Alfarius moved as a shadow between tangled roots and crumbling ruins, his armor muted to the color of wet stone. Around him, the air throbbed with a low chant, no longer worship, but preparation. He could feel the sleepers shifting from latent myth into living movement, a tide he had once engineered now swelling without his signal. Somewhere within this tide, he knew, the first open betrayal of the Legion had already begun. All his instincts told him to vanish, but the strategist in him demanded to witness the moment when a seed split open and revealed its hidden blade. He reached a ridge where vines had grown into a lattice of serpents. Below lay a clearing illuminated by braziers of green flame. Hundreds of locals knelt in concentric circles, masks of bone and cloth concealing their faces. At the center stood Irene, no longer in Legion colors, but wearing the same serpentine cloth as the sleepers. She spoke softly, but her words carried through the humid night. We were taught to hide, to infiltrate, to become the mask. But a mask can also suffocate. Tonight we remove it. The crowd echoed her, the sound like surf breaking on a drowned shore. Alfarius remained hidden, his visor magnifying her movements. He saw how she stood, calm, deliberate, every gesture shaped to trigger the subconscious responses he had drilled into his operatives. She was using his own training to unbind his network. Around the clearing, men and women once embedded as silent agents of the Hydra now stepped forward, placing their weapons on the ground, crossing their hands over their chests. This was not a revolt of gunfire, but of withdrawal, the slow bleeding of secrecy into daylight. He moved back into the jungle, his mind flicking through possibilities. He could call down an orbital strike, erase the clearing and its voices. He could step forward and reclaim command through fear, reveal himself as the architect and demand obedience. But each option felt like shattering glass. Once done, the Legion's structure would never hold the same shape again. He remembered his earliest maxim, control by choice, not by chains, and wondered if he had ever truly believed it. A coded pulse reached him through his helm, a distress signal from one of his inner council. Our cells on Jerif fall. Orders contradict. We are exposed. Another signal followed from a different cell. Operation Hallow cancelled, awaiting true directive. The transmissions overlapped into static. Alfarius muted them, feeling their weight settle in his chest. The betrayal at the garden world was not isolated. It was a fracture radiating outward through every coil of the Hydra. He descended a narrow path to a hidden vault built beneath the jungle floor. Inside, a hololithic table flickered with a sector map. Where once his cells glowed as steady points of light, now they pulsed erratically, some going dark, others linking to unknown nodes. In the center, Irene's faction spread like a stain, connecting sleeper cultures and rogue operatives into a new web. He reached for the controls but hesitated. Every action now would be reactive. The initiative had shifted. He closed his eyes and recalled the first time he had met Erin. Barely a teenager on a forgotten mining world, eyes bright with fury, eager to vanish into the Legion and become something larger than herself. He had taught her patience, deception, adaptability. Now she embodied all three, but turned inward, a mirror held up to him. He felt an ache that was not anger, but a kind of mournful pride. This was the Hydra's first true betrayal, and also its proof of life. From deeper in the vault came a soft hiss. Alpharius drew his blade and advanced. A figure stepped from the shadows, a courier, visor mirrored like the one from Nymeth's Vale. The courier knelt, offering another data crypt. He took it, opened it. Inside a single line burned. The knife chooses. No coordinates, no code. Only that. He looked down at the courier, but the figure had already dissolved into a cloud of nanite ash, leaving no trace. He returned to the hololithic table. The Garden World's map zoomed outward, showing fleet movements in nearby systems, rogue transports, hidden warships, cells converging. They were not preparing to attack the Imperium or even the Alpha Legion. They were preparing to vanish, to become a network without a center. The knife was choosing not to strike but to slip away. He realized suddenly that this, not open rebellion, was the most dangerous wound, an invisible legion he could not call or predict. Above ground, the chant shifted to a low roar. Alpharius climbed back to the ridge. The clearing below had transformed. The sleepers and operatives were moving outward in coordinated lines, burning sigils into the soil that rewrote the Hydra's emblem into a new pattern. Still serpentine but coiling away from a hollow center. Erin raised her arms. "We will be unseen no longer," she said. "We will be ourselves." The crowd echoed, the sound rolling into the jungle like thunder. Alpharius stepped from the shadows at last, his armor shedding its camouflage. The green flames reflected off his sea-green plates, making him appear both ghostly and immense. The crowd fell silent. Erin turned to face him. For a moment neither spoke. "You taught us to infiltrate," she said quietly. "To survive by becoming the lie. But survival is not life. We have chosen another path." He descended into the clearing, each step deliberate. "And what path is that?" "To be what we are without you," she replied. "To be many heads without a master's hand." He stopped a few paces from her. Around them, the crowd's tension hung like a drawn bowstring. "You think you can control what you've become?" he asked. "The galaxy will devour you." Her eyes did not waver. Better devoured than hollow. For a heartbeat, he saw her as she had been. Young, eager, believing in a cause. He wanted to tell her of the threats only he had glimpsed. The monstrous tides rising in the dark between stars, the prophecy that had driven every secret deal. But he knew it would sound like another manipulation. He raised his gauntlet slightly. A hidden signal pulsed from his armor, activating contingencies woven into the sleeper's infrastructure. For an instant the ground trembled, as if some vast machine beneath were stirring. He could erase them all with a thought. The crowd stiffened, sensing the unseen danger. Erin lowered her head. "Do it then," she said. "Show them the truth of the Hydra." Alpharius's finger hovered over the command rune. He felt the weight of centuries, of every mask worn, every lie told. The faces around him were not enemies, but children of his design. Killing them would end the fracture, but also the idea of the Legion as anything but a weapon. His hand fell to his side. "No," he said softly, "not tonight." The tension eased like a held breath released. Erin exhaled, a flicker of surprise crossing her face. Alpharius turned, looking out over the jungle where fireflies traced serpentine paths in the darkness. "The knife chooses," he murmured, almost to himself. "Perhaps the knife chooses you." Without another word, he stepped back into the shadows, his armor fading to black. The crowd parted instinctively, letting him pass. In their eyes he saw fear, anger, and something else. Recognition. He was no longer their unseen master, but a man walking away from his own labyrinth. He reached the pod at the jungle's edge and sealed himself inside. As it lifted through the canopy, he looked down once more. The clearing's green flames formed a new sigil, bright against the night, its coils spreading outward like roots. He knew this was only the beginning of a far larger unraveling, one that might consume the Imperium or save it in ways he could not foresee. Above the atmosphere, the pod engaged its drives, carrying him into the star-flecked dark. He closed his eyes and felt the Hydra's coils loosening from his grasp, slipping into currents beyond control. The first betrayal had not ended him. It had transformed him. Somewhere ahead lay a choice greater than any he had faced, a decision that would decide whether the Hydra remained a shadow or became a storm. For now, he drifted, listening to the silence between transmissions, a silence that felt almost like freedom. Alfarius's pod slid through the emptiness like a shard of obsidian glass, silent engines leaving no signature. Inside he sat motionless, eyes half closed, as data streams unfolded across the canopy. Each pulse of light was a cell reporting in, but the pattern no longer resembled a web, rather a scattering of sparks across an endless dark. He had once called this scattering strategy. Now it looked like fracture. He pressed gloved fingers against his temples. The ache there felt older than bone, a pulse from every life he had woven and cut away. He summoned a different layer of code, an older one, buried beneath a dozen encryption veils. It was the contingency he had written for the day the Hydra's heads turned inward. Thread protocol. At its heart was not destruction, but reweaving, a slow draw of scattered cells back into a single pattern. Yet as the script loaded, he saw anomalies blinking within it, new signals woven through his old lines like silver veins in stone. Someone had been rewriting his protocol as he wrote it, turning his recall into a dispersal. The Hydra was not just slipping away, it was learning to thread itself. He leaned back, letting the canopy go dark. Memory unrolled in silence. He saw himself decades earlier in a hidden amphitheater, much like the one on the hollow moon, explaining to recruits the beauty of infiltration, the power of patience. He had promised them anonymity as immortality, told them that a legion without faces could never truly die. Now he understood the cost. If no one can die, no one can truly be known. Names vanish, motives blur, and loyalty becomes another mask. The pod's navigation chimed softly. Destination reached. A drifting manufactorum hidden in the shadow of a gas giant's rings. Here, in secret, the Alpha Legion had built its strangest arsenal. Not weapons of war, but of culture. Technology designed to seed myths, erase memories, rewrite bloodlines. Alfarius had come to gather what remained before it, too slipped beyond his grasp. Docking clamps hissed. He stepped into a corridor of steel ribs, each etched with data sigils glowing faintly blue. Servitors drifted like eyeless ghosts, maintaining machinery whose purpose they did not comprehend. In the manufactorum's core lay the loom, a vast sphere of black crystal suspended by gravitic fields, threads of light spinning from it into 1,000 consoles. Here operatives had once programmed entire societies as easily as one might weave cloth. Now many of its threads hung slack, others shimmering with alien hues. He approached the loom. Its surface rippled, reflecting him as a hydra of shifting faces. He pressed a palm against it. Instantly, his mind filled with whispers. cells calling to one another without him, sleeper cultures exchanging signals he had not authorized. Images flickered, the garden world's new sigils spreading to colonies in the halo stars, Erine speaking in temples he had never seen, operatives adopting new names and refusing old codes. The loom did not resist. It showed him everything, a tapestry he had started but no longer owned. Footsteps echoed behind him. He did not turn. "Report," he said quietly. A voice answered from the shadows, familiar, weary. "There is no report, my lord. Only choices." Erin stepped into the light, armor stripped of insignia, but polished to a muted gleam. She had followed him here without authorization, or perhaps because he had left a trail for her to find. 2 other operatives flanked her, their expressions hidden behind blank visors. Alfarius kept his hand on the loom. "You risk much coming here." "You built us to risk," she replied, "to think for ourselves. Now we do." She glanced at the loom, eyes narrowing at its shifting light. "This is where the Hydra begins and ends." He turned to face her fully. It began with a desire to save the Imperium, to steer it from a greater fall. Every seed, every sleeper, every hidden alliance, meant to shape the storm before it broke. "And yet the storm broke anyway," she said softly. "You taught us to infiltrate until infiltration became identity. You taught us patience until patience became paralysis. We are no longer one legion, Alfarius. We are many, and some of us have chosen a different design." The 2 operatives with her placed data shards on a nearby console. Instantly, the loom pulsed, its threads reshaping. Alfarius felt the shift like a shudder in his own body. "What have you done?" "We've woven an alternative," Erin said. "A net without a center. Cells connected not by command but by mutual knowledge. No one can betray it because no one owns it. You could crush us, but you'd only scatter the pattern and make it stronger." He studied her, searching for a crack of uncertainty. "Do you understand what you're unleashing? Without a guiding hand, you'll become 100 contradictory movements. The galaxy will tear you apart." She met his gaze steadily. "Maybe, or maybe we'll become something the Imperium cannot predict. Isn't that what you always wanted?" Silence settled between them, broken only by the faint hum of the loom. Alfarius felt the old reflex rise. Strike now, end the threat, seize back control. Yet another thought moved beneath it, slow and coiling. Perhaps this was not a threat but an evolution. The Hydra had always been about adaptation. Maybe this was the final lesson, one he had not intended to teach. He stepped closer to the loom, fingers brushing a thread of light. Images spilled across the sphere. Battles that might never happen. Empires collapsing under the weight of invisible ideas, new symbols rising where old banners fell. At the center, a single point of darkness pulsed like a heartbeat. "You've left a gap," he murmured. "It's not a gap," Erin said. "It's a choice." He looked at her, then at the 2 operatives, then back at the loom. "If I step into that gap, what happens?" "You become one of us," she said. "Not the master. Another head, another voice." For a moment, Alfarius imagined it. No more masks, no more command. Only a network where he was a node among many. Freedom disguised as dissolution. The idea was terrifying and oddly enticing. But beyond that image flickered another. The galaxy aflame, alien predators and human tyrants filling the vacuum where his guidance once was. He withdrew his hand. "Not yet." Erin inclined her head, as if she had expected this. "Then at least don't destroy it. Let it grow. Watch what it becomes." Alfarius stared at the loom. Threads shifted around the dark center, forming patterns he could not decipher. He realized that even if he destroyed this manufactorum, the idea had already seeded itself across the network. The Hydra would not die with him. It had never been only his. He stepped back. "Take what you've built," he said quietly. "But know that every pattern carries its shadow." Erin gave a faint smile, tired, almost sad. "We learned that from you." Without another word, she and her operatives withdrew, disappearing into the corridors. The loom's light dimmed to a low pulse. Alfarius stood alone, the silence of the manufactorum pressing in like deep water. He deactivated the sphere, plunging the chamber into darkness. For a long moment, he listened to the hum of hidden machinery, the echoes of footsteps gone. He felt neither victory nor defeat, but a strange hollow space, as if some weight had been lifted and left an absence. Perhaps this was how an empire ended, not with fire, but with quiet choices. He turned toward the docking bay. Outside, the gas giant's rings glimmered faintly, shards of ice reflecting a sun they would never touch. He thought of the Legion's cells scattered like those shards, each reflecting a fragment of his light, now perhaps turning into their own. The Hydra's coils were loosening, but something else was coiling in the void beyond. As he boarded his pod, Alfarius whispered a line from the Legion's oldest catechism, words no one else remembered. "The serpent sheds its skin, not its essence." He did not know if it was reassurance or warning. The pod lifted from the manufactorum, engines silent, carrying him back into the starless corridor where his designs had begun. Ahead lay decisions he had postponed too long, and somewhere beyond the next system the reckoning waited. Neither his plan nor Erin's, but something born of both. The void above the Kaleth expanse churned like a slow-moving storm of black glass. Broken asteroids drifted in sluggish spirals, their surfaces scarred by ancient bombardments, and the light of a dying star seeped through the dust like watered ink. Alfarius's warship, this time wearing the identity of an anonymous merchant escort, glided at the edge of the debris field, its hull dark as a shadow. Inside the command chamber, the glow of hololithic projectors cast long green lines across his armor. He stood at the center of the room with hands clasped behind his back, watching two fleets converge in the distance. No banners flew, no vox calls were exchanged, only silent vectors of destruction, one line intersecting another. He had arranged this encounter weeks before, a calculated collision between a splinter of his own legion and a rogue flotilla supposedly loyal to the Imperium. Each side believed the other an enemy. In truth, both were extensions of his design. Such conflicts were usually bloodless, a feigned retreat, a quiet disappearance. But tonight he sensed a different current, like static before lightning. Orders he had not given were moving through both fleets. Weapons were warming without his signal. Somewhere in the tangle of cells, someone else had pulled a thread. He switched to a narrow band channel keyed only to his inner operatives. "Hold fire," he said. "Await confirmation." The reply came back jagged and overlapping, different voices contradicting one another. "Already engaged. Enemy advancing. Hydra command strike. Hydra command cease." Static drowned them. Alfarius cut the line, jaw tightening. This was the fracture made manifest, not in whispers, but in plasma bolts. Through the viewing port he saw the first flashes of light. Torpedoes lanced out from the splinter fleet, blooming into silent fire against the void. The rogue flotilla responded with massed volleys. No insignia marked them, yet he could identify the patterns of maneuver, the Hydra fighting itself, heads snapping at unseen tails. He felt an ache deep in his chest, heavier than any wound. He had built a legion of ghosts. Now the ghosts were at war. He ordered the warship forward, its false transponder flickering to match a neutral humanitarian vessel. Servitors at the consoles obeyed without question. As the ship entered the no-man's land between fleets, Alpharius activated a layered broadcast. His voice split into multiple timbres to resonate with each cell's conditioning. Cease fire. Stand down. Hydra observes. For a heartbeat, the battle slowed, ships hesitating. But then a counter-signal surged through the channels, carrying his own cadence twisted into a command to strike. The pause shattered. Lances of energy burned across the void once more. Alpharius felt the cold edge of something like awe. Someone out there had replicated his voice, his codes, even his rhythm. Not merely a rogue operative, but a mirror, a rival Hydra grown from his own pattern. He imagined Irene at some distant console, her eyes calm, weaving the engagement as he once had. This was no longer a war of deception, but a duel of architects. He left the bridge and walked to the drop bay, where a single stealth shuttle waited. He could have directed the battle from afar, but instinct told him to go into the storm, to see the consequences with his own eyes. As the shuttle launched, the warship's silhouette vanished into the dust clouds, leaving him a solitary spark threading between two jaws of fire. The shuttle darted through wreckage, twisted hulls, drifting corpses, frozen droplets of blood like garnets. Every few seconds a burst of light flared nearby as another vessel died silently. Alpharius guided the craft toward a crippled cruiser at the battle's center. Its hull was scarred with Hydra sigils hastily overpainted, half erased. This had once been his flagship in the sector, now fighting under a different command. He attached the shuttle to an airlock and stepped inside. The corridors were dark, emergency lights casting a dim green glow. He moved through them like a ghost, hearing distant clashes of small arms fire. Operatives fought operatives in the bowels of the ship, each believing the other traitor. He passed a wall where someone had scratched words in High Gothic. "Who is the hand?" The letters dripped with fresh blood. At the command deck, he found the new master of the ship, a masked figure standing before the main viewport, flanked by guards whose armor bore no insignia. The figure turned as Alpharius entered, and for a moment it was like looking into a reflection. Same stature, same poise, but the eyes behind the visor burned with a different light. "Alpharius," the figure said, voice modulated to his own timbre. "Or am I?" He approached slowly. "If you know my name, you know what you're playing with." The figure tilted its head. "Not playing, evolving. You built us to infiltrate until infiltration became identity. We have stepped beyond. We are war without banners, loyalty without masters. You taught us patience. We learned freedom." The guards raised their weapons but did not fire. Alpharius could feel the ship shudder under another salvo. "You're killing brothers," he said. "For what?" "For the choice you denied us," the figure replied. "A legion that belongs to itself." He almost laughed, a dry, bitter sound. "And you think freedom will save you from the galaxy?" "Freedom may destroy us," the figure said, "but at least it will be ours." Silence stretched. Through the viewport the battle raged on, two halves of a serpent devouring each other. Alpharius looked at the masked figure and saw not an enemy but a consequence. All his secret deals, all his hidden seeds had led here, war without heraldry, motives dissolved, even his own voice stolen. This was the Alpha Legion's true face, reflected back at him. He lowered his weapon slowly. "End this engagement," he said. Let them stand down. We will talk. The figure hesitated. If I give the order, it will be as you once did, an unseen hand shaping the pattern. I want them to choose. Alfarius stepped closer until only a meter separated them. Then stand with me. 2 voices, 1 command. Let them see we are not shadows but men making a decision. For a long moment nothing moved. Then the figure nodded. Together they spoke into the ship's vox, their voices overlapping like twin echoes. Hydra observes. Cease fire. The command rippled outward. This time no counter-signal came. One by one the guns fell silent. Ships drifted apart, their engines dimming. The void filled with debris and stillness. Alfarius looked at the masked figure. You have your freedom, he said quietly. But freedom carries its shadow. The galaxy will come for you. The figure removed its visor. It was not Irene, but another operative, younger, eyes bright with a fierce calm. We know, he said, but we are done being your knives. Alfarius felt a strange hollow ache, part loss, part relief. He extended a hand. The operative clasped it. A brief, firm grip. No oath exchanged, no promise, only acknowledgement. He left the command deck without looking back. In the shuttle, as it disengaged from the cruiser, he watched the 2 fleets drift in wary silence. No victory, no defeat, just exhaustion. This was war without banners, the Hydra fighting itself to a standstill. As the shuttle threaded through the debris, Alfarius closed his eyes. For the first time in centuries, he had stood not as master, but as participant. He had seen his legions step beyond his grasp, yet also choose, however briefly, mercy over annihilation. Perhaps that choice held the seed of something new, or perhaps it was only another mask, another pause before a deeper fracture. Above the expanse the dying star flickered, its light caught in the dust like embers in smoke. Alfarius opened his eyes and whispered to no one. The serpent sheds, but still coils. Ahead lay the long retreat into shadow, and the question of whether a hidden hand can still guide a Hydra that has tasted its own freedom. The fleets had drifted apart, but their silence was brittle, a pause held between clenched teeth. In the weeks that followed the ceasefire, rumours spread through the Hydra's hidden channels like veins of frost through old stone. Alfarius moved among those rumours as one might walk through an unfamiliar garden at night, every leaf familiar in shape but strange to the touch. He had returned to a covert bastion carved inside a dying comet, a place once used for indoctrination and rest. Now it felt like a mausoleum of his own intentions. Servitors cleaned corridors that no longer led to loyal cells. Training chambers echoed with drills conducted by instructors whose allegiance was uncertain. Even the air smelled different, less of oil and discipline, more of damp stone and unearthed secrets. In the command hall, a great mural had once displayed the Hydra sigil coiling around a world. Someone had scratched the line through its center, leaving the heads unbound. Alfarius studied it in silence, feeling the same ache he had felt on the cruiser. The Hydra was becoming something he could no longer command, only witness. He summoned his surviving inner council. One by one, their hololithic images flickered above the obsidian table. Some appeared in legion colors, others in neutral robes, a few only as encrypted silhouettes. Their voices overlapped, each bringing fragments of news, cells vanishing, sleeper cultures awakening ahead of schedule, supply lines rerouted without orders. This is not mere drift, one said. It is design. It is sabotage, another countered. Your name is being used to open channels we never sanctioned. We need purges, a third insisted. Cut out the rot before it spreads. Alfarius listened without speaking, his eyes on the scratched Hydra. Purges would solve nothing. The rot was not an infection, but a consequence, the fruit of seeds he had planted himself. When the voices fell silent, he said only, "Hold your positions. Do not strike at each other. I will find the source." Cut the link before they could argue. The room felt emptier for their absence. He retreated to his private chamber, a narrow vault lined with memory crystals. Each crystal contained a name, a face, a mission, a life erased for the sake of secrecy. He passed his fingers over them as one might brush beads of a rosary. For the first time, he wondered if he should have allowed his legion to keep their names. Perhaps then loyalty would have meant something more than habit. Perhaps then betrayal would not have been inevitable. A signal blinked at the edge of his vision, faint but deliberate. An old emergency code used only once before in the Legion's history. It originated from a sector long thought sealed, where he had hidden one of his deepest experiments, an alliance with a splinter cult of the Mechanicus known as the Ciphered Forge. They had built devices capable of altering memory at planetary scale, tools meant to implant myths or erase them entirely. If that forge had been compromised, every sleeper culture he had seeded could already be rewriting itself. He departed the comet without ceremony, travelling alone in a vessel stripped of any Hydra markings. The journey to the Ciphered Forge took him through uncharted void, where stars hung like pale scars on black flesh. As he neared the system, he saw its sun guttering, an ember choked by ash. The forge world itself floated in orbit, once a labyrinth of shining spires now draped in darkness. Power readings were erratic, transmissions silent. He descended through poisonous clouds to a landing platform cracked and overgrown with metallic vines. No servitors waited. The only sound was the slow drip of condensed toxins from the sky. Inside the forge halls, he found statues toppled, cogwheels split, data shrines defaced with new sigils, serpents coiling outward, their heads crowned with open eyes. It was the same symbol he had seen on the garden world, now etched into steel. At the heart of the forge lay a chamber once used to calibrate memory engines. Alfarius entered, footsteps echoing like hammer strikes. The great machine at its center, a sphere of interlocking rings, still turned, but its light pulsed irregularly, casting shifting shadows across the walls. Before it knelt a figure in sea-green armor dulled by ash. At the sound of his approach, the figure rose and removed its helm. It was not Irene, but another of his veterans arrest, eyes hollow yet steady. "You should not be here," Alfarius said quietly. Oris' mouth twisted in something like a smile. "Neither should you. This place is no longer yours." "What have you done?" "We fulfilled your design," Orest replied. "You taught us to plant myths. We have planted one you did not foresee." He gestured to the machine. The sleepers no longer wait for signals. They remember themselves. They remember what we were before masks. Alfarius circled the sphere, fingers grazing its cold rings. "You think memory alone can hold a legion together? It already does," Oris said. "They speak of a Hydra without a head, a network of equals. They will not fight each other because there is no master to betray." "And yet you fired on your own brothers," Alfarius murmured. "A necessary bloodletting," Oris said, voice low, "to break the habit of obedience." Alfarius stopped. "You sound like Irene." "She opened the door," Orest admitted. "I stepped through." The machine's light flared, projecting images onto the chamber walls. Sleeper cultures rising in unison, operatives casting off code names, fleets moving along paths Alfarius had never drawn. It was not chaos but a new order, fractal and decentralized. For a moment, he felt the strange vertigo of seeing his life's work transformed into something alien yet unmistakably born of his hand. "You could have asked," he said. "You never asked us," Orest replied. Silence stretched between them. The machine's pulse slowed, casting the room in alternating darkness and green glow. Alfarius felt the weight of a decision pressing on him like the pressure of deep water. He could destroy the forge, wipe out the rogue memory code, attempt to claw back control, but the act would only scatter the seeds further, make martyrs of his defecting operatives. Or he could step back, let the Hydra grow wild, and risk it devouring not just the Imperium, but itself. He stepped closer to Orest, until their visors almost touched. "Do you believe you are free?" he asked softly. Orest held his gaze. "Not yet, but we are learning." Alfarius drew a slow breath. The air smelled of burnt oil and ozone. He turned to the machine, placing his hand on its outer ring. With a flick of his fingers, he could overload its core, erase every altered memory in the sector. Instead, he only felt the vibration of its pulse, steady as a heart. "Then learn," he said at last. "But remember who planted the seed." He released the ring and stepped back. Orest watched him warily, perhaps expecting a strike. Alfarius only lowered his helm and turned toward the exit. As he walked out, the machine's light dimmed behind him, the new sigil glowing faintly on the walls. Outside the forge, the sky had grown darker, the sun little more than a dying coal. Alfarius boarded his vessel and lifted off. From orbit, he looked down at the spires receding beneath clouds of metallic ash. The betrayal inside the Legion was no longer a fracture, but a metamorphosis. He had lost command, but perhaps gained something stranger. A Legion that might survive precisely because it had rejected him. The vessel slid into the void. Alfarius closed his eyes, feeling the echo of the machine's pulse still in his palm. He whispered to himself, not sure whether it was a warning or a benediction. The Hydra remembers. Ahead lay uncharted routes, cells unbound, and the possibility that the Alpha Legion's greatest secret would not be its lies, but its freedom. A drifting cathedral ship hung in the cold gulf between systems, its spires cracked and its stained glass viewports dimmed to a dull amber. Once it had been a neutral sanctuary for covert negotiations, a place where the Alpha Legion's envoys met governors, rebels, and heretics under 100 assumed names. Now it floated half-lit and silent, as if the galaxy itself had exhaled and left a husk. Alfarius arrived alone, his vessel docking at a hidden port far below the main hull. He felt the stillness in his bones before he even crossed the threshold. This was supposed to be a conclave of allies, but the air tasted of endings. He walked a corridor lined with icons from dead faiths, sun discs, spiral sigils, carved serpents devouring themselves. Once they had been decoration. Now they felt like accusations. The walls hummed faintly with static from shield generators running on minimal power. At intervals, servitors drifted past, their ocular implants flickering with scrambled code, as if they no longer knew whose orders to obey. Alfarius moved without disguise. The time for masks had not ended, but he had chosen to wear none tonight. The main hall opened before him like the inside of a broken lung. Benches lay overturned. Projectors flickered, casting fractured constellations on the ceiling. Representatives of the splintered Hydra sat or stood in loose knots. Rogue operatives, sleeper leaders, delegates from cults he had seeded decades earlier. Some wore legion armor stripped of sigils, others cloaks of local fabrics, a few only the anonymity of blank visors. Their voices overlapped in low murmurs that ceased as he stepped into the light. He stopped at the center of the hall where once a dais had stood. It was gone now, dismantled, leaving a circle of bare metal. The symbolism was obvious. No throne, no head of the Hydra, only a ring. "You call this conclave," he said quietly. His voice carried without amplification, the old training still woven into every listener's reflexes. "I came." A tall figure emerged from the knots, a woman draped in deep green cloth, mask carved into a serpent with open eyes. She removed it, revealing Irene. The weeks since the garden world had marked her face with fatigue, but also a steadier kind of resolve. She spoke without hesitation. "We called it because the pattern you wove has reached its breaking point. Cells act without guidance. Myths grow without authors. We cannot pretend to be one legion any longer." Alpharius inclined his head. "And yet, you are all here." "We came to decide what we will be," another delegate said, stepping forward. "Orest, from the ciphered forge, armor dulled by ash. Not what you will command." Around the circle murmurs rose. Some operatives glanced at Alpharius with open challenge, others with a lingering respect, some with fear. He felt the weight of their stares as he once felt the weight of their obedience. "Then speak," he said. Erin gestured to the broken dais. "This is the Hydra's heart now. No center, only coils. We propose to end the fiction of a single master. Each cell will act as an equal head. Information will be shared, not hoarded. Operations will be chosen by consensus. The masks will be worn by choice, not decree." The word struck him like a soft but precise blade. He looked around the circle. "You think consensus can hold against the Imperium? Against Xenos predators? Against chaos itself? You will tear yourselves apart." "Perhaps," Orest said, "but at least the tearing will be ours." Alpharius's gaze drifted to the ceiling where fractured constellations flickered. He remembered the first time he had stood in this hall decades ago, a young Primarch forging secret alliances, believing he could shape the galaxy unseen. Every decision since then had been a tightening coil. Now the coil had loosened, and yet here they were, his children, his shadows, gathered without compulsion. That paradox felt heavier than any weapon. He stepped to the edge of the circle. "You want freedom," he said softly, "but freedom without discipline is noise. You have been taught to move as one mind. Without that, you are prey." Erin met his eyes. "Then teach us something else. Not obedience, resilience." For a moment he felt the old reflex rise, to deliver a speech, weave a myth, bind them again. But he sensed it would break like dry reeds. Instead he said, "Show me what you've built." At her signal, the hall's projectors stabilized, casting a vast map of the sector above their heads. Lines of movement radiated from dozens of cells, intertwining like roots, but without a central trunk. Data icons pulsed where sleeper cultures had awakened, not in chaos, but in coordinated swells. Alpharius studied it, recognizing a design he had not drawn, but whose logic he understood instinctively. They had learned from him, from his very methods, and evolved them into something new. "It's fragile," he murmured. "It's alive," Erin replied. He circled the map slowly. "And where do I stand in this pattern?" "That is for you to decide," she said. "You can try to crush it and become a relic, or you can step into it and become another voice." Murmurs rippled. Some operatives reached for weapons as if expecting violence, others leaned forward as if hoping. Alpharius felt the moment balance like a blade. He thought of the battle in the Kaleth expanse, the fleet silenced by two overlapping voices. He thought of the ciphered forge, of the garden world's new sigil, of every mask he had worn. He imagined himself as one node among many, no longer architect but participant. The idea frightened him, but also loosened something in his chest, a knot he had carried for centuries. He raised his hand. The murmurs stilled. "Then let us test your pattern," he said. "One operation chosen by you, executed by us all. If it succeeds, I will take my place as you have taken yours. If it fails, the Hydra dissolves into dust." Erin glanced at Arrest, then back at him. "Agreed." From the crowd, a delegate stepped forward, offering a data slate. "A convoy of black ship prisoners," the delegate said, "in transit through the veiled corridor. If freed, they could become operatives or allies. But the route is guarded by a rogue war master who already suspects us. We propose to strike and liberate them openly, under no banner." Alpharius took the slate. The plan was audacious, nearly reckless. Precisely the kind of move his old legion would never risk, without 3 layers of deception. Yet it carried a certain elegance, a single action to prove whether unity without hierarchy could function. He looked up at the circle. "Then this is your first test." "It is ours," Erin said, "and yours." For a heartbeat, the hall seemed to breathe as one. Alpharius felt the shift like gravity, a tide moving beneath his feet. Not obedience, not command, something else, unformed but real. He returned the slate to Erin. "We strike together," he said. "But know this. The galaxy will see you now. No more masks, no more deniability. This is a choice that cannot be unmade." "We know," she said quietly. He stepped back, eyes sweeping the circle. "Then prepare yourselves, 3 days from now, at the veiled corridor. Show me your Hydra." The murmurs rose again, this time like a current, rather than a scatter of voices. Operatives began transmitting signals, linking nodes across the sector. Above, the fractured constellations aligned briefly into a pattern that looked almost whole. Alpharius watched it fade, unsure whether it was omen or illusion. As the conclave dissolved, he remained alone in the hall, the scratched Hydra on the wall catching the dim light. He reached out, tracing the cut with one finger. The metal was cold, rough. He thought of the prisoner convoy, the rogue war master, the plan chosen without him. He thought of himself stepping into a design he had not authored. Perhaps this was the only way forward, by risking the Hydra he had built on the very freedom it now claimed. Outside the cathedral ship, the void waited, silent and endless. Alpharius drew a slow breath and whispered to the dark, "Let the serpent show its heads." Then he turned and walked toward his vessel, carrying not orders but a question. Through the black mouth of the veiled corridor, the stars stretched thin and cold, their light bent by ancient warp shears that drifted like invisible reefs. Alpharius's strike craft slid between them without beacon or signature, one dark scale among many. Around him, dozens of hidden vessels traced silent arcs, each belonging to a cell that had once answered to him, but now moved of its own accord. No banners, no call signs. Only a mesh of coded pulses flickering between ships like the whisper of neural synapses. This was the Hydra's first operation without a master, and its outcome would decide whether it lived or became a scattering of lost heads. From his cockpit, Alpharius saw the convoy ahead, 6 colossal black ships carrying psychic prisoners toward the War Master's bastion. They floated in formation like chained leviathans, hulls blacker than the void. Escorting them were war cruisers bristling with turrets, their drive flares pale and sickly under the corridor's warped light. He had planned hundreds of operations like this, but never as a guest, never as a test of someone else's design. The sensation was both unnerving and faintly liberating, like walking unmasked in a city of masks. He opened the secure channel that linked all strike craft. For the first time, his voice was not an order, but a signal among equals. Positions? Responses came back not as deferential affirmations, but as simple data points, coordinates, readiness, silent acknowledgements. The net held. He allowed himself a slow breath. They had learned to speak without hierarchy, to braid information rather than obey. Yet under the surface, he felt the tremor of doubt. Could a pattern without a center endure the shock of battle? He switched to a private channel with Irene. Her face appeared as a ghostly shimmer on his display, eyes calm and intent. "You shape the plan," he said quietly. "You give the word." She tilted her head. "We give it together." That was the point. They counted down as one. At 0, the Hydra unfurled. Silent minds blinked awake from the corridor's debris, seeded days earlier by operatives Alfarius had not even known existed. They detonated in a web of pale fire, cutting the escorting cruisers off from one another. At the same moment, strike craft erupted from hidden vectors, not in a single spearhead, but in dozens of micro-assaults converging like a flock of razored birds. Boarding pods slammed into the black ship's flanks, disgorging operatives clad in sea-green armor stripped of sigils. No rallying cries, only the hiss of breaching charges. Alfarius guided his craft through the chaos, landing on the lead black ship's hull. As the airlock hissed open, he felt the old pulse of battle in his blood, a rhythm he had not indulged openly in decades. He stepped into darkness lit only by the glow of psi dampeners. Inside, prisoners wailed behind sealed cells, their minds a low psychic howl. He advanced down the corridor, bolter raised, his steps silent but sure. A squad of enemy armsmen rounded the corner. They hesitated, momentarily unsure which Hydra this was, ally or foe. Alfarius fired once, clean and quick. The squad fell. He moved past them, thinking of the irony. Even now, in open action, confusion shielded him. On the ship's command deck, Irene's team was already at work disabling the warp drives. Alfarius joined them, scanning the displays. Convoy status. 3rd and 5th ships secured, one operative replied. Resistance heavy on the 2nd. War Master's reinforcements en route. Outside, the escorting cruisers regrouped faster than expected. Through the viewport, Alfarius saw their drives flare bright as they powered weapons for a counter-attack. Without central command, the Hydra cells would have to improvise or be crushed. He opened the net, his voice steady, but no longer absolute. Options. A dozen replies flooded back. Decoys, feints, sabotage. The network's map pulsed with shifting lines as cells proposed, revised, adapted. He realized they were not waiting for him. They were already weaving. In minutes, a plan emerged, fragmented but coherent, drawn from the collective rather than a single mind. He looked at Irene. "Do it," he said. Outside, hidden craft jettisoned captured prisoners into hardened pods, launching them toward prearranged rendezvous points. Other cells overloaded captured turrets to explode outward, masking the escape in a storm of shrapnel and light. For a moment, the entire corridor blazed like a serpent shedding sparks. On the command deck, Alfarius felt the ship tremble. Warning runes flared red. Enemy cruisers had locked on. He activated a local jammer, cloaking their position for a few seconds. "Move now," he said into the net. "All pods away." Through the viewport, he watched pods vanish into the dark, each carrying psychers who would soon be operatives or liabilities. The Hydra had taken its prize, but the War Master's fleet still closed in. Irene turned to him. "We can't outfight them." "No," he said, "but we can outthink them." He keyed a hidden command into the black ship's engines, one he had installed long ago in anticipation of capture. The drives began to overload, their energy building toward a silent implosion. He sent a burst across the net. Signal shadow coil, disengage. Instantly, Hydra craft peeled away, their transponders scattering false echoes. Alfarius and Erin sprinted back to their shuttle as the black ship shuddered violently. They launched seconds before the drives collapsed inward, tearing the massive vessel into a blossom of imploding light. The shockwave rolled across the corridor, scattering enemy sensors and giving the Hydra the veil it needed to vanish. In the aftermath, only wreckage remained, drifting like dark snow. The War Master's fleet prowled among it, scanning for survivors, but the Hydra was gone. Its ships dispersed into shadows, its pods already streaking toward hidden sanctuaries. Inside the shuttle, Alfarius sat across from Erin, both breathing hard but uninjured. He studied her face in the dim light. "You succeeded," he said. "We succeeded," she corrected. He inclined his head. "Your pattern holds, at least for now." She met his gaze. "It isn't mine. It's ours." Outside, the veiled corridor receded into darkness. Alfarius felt a strange quiet inside him. For the first time, he had not orchestrated every detail, yet the operation had worked. Messy, improvisational, but effective. The Hydra had acted without a head and lived, but the quiet carried an undertone of dread. If they could succeed without him, they could also fail without him, unleashing chaos he could no longer steer. The galaxy was not forgiving. Psychers freed from black ships could become allies, or conduits for horrors. Without discipline, a legion of masks might become a legion of wildfires. He looked down at his gauntleted hands. The pattern was no longer his, but perhaps his place in it could still matter. Not as master, but as a voice of caution, a memory of the cost of freedom. He thought of the prophecy that had begun all this, of the Imperium's slow collapse. Maybe the Hydra's new shape was not a betrayal, but an answer he had never dared test. As the shuttle slipped into warp space, the hull sang with a low vibration. Alfarius closed his eyes and listened. It sounded less like engines and more like breathing, a living network, a creature stirring. He whispered, "The immortal lie becomes the living truth." Erin tilted her head. "What did you say?" "Nothing," he said softly. "Only that the Hydra moves." Beyond the viewport, the stars stretched into lines of white, then into a single, endless coil. Alfarius felt himself drawn along it, not as its architect, but as one scale among many. For the first time in centuries, he could not see where the pattern ended, and that uncertainty felt almost like hope. A cold blue sun burned low over the dead world of Tigres, casting its light through fractured clouds of dust. Once it had been a fortress planet, a hidden anchor of the Alpha Legion's operations. Now it was a graveyard of unfinished projects and abandoned myths. Alfarius descended alone, his shuttle skimming across plains of glassy slag, where training cities had stood. Towers lay toppled like bones. Here, long ago, he had taught his operatives that unity was a weapon sharper than any blade. Now the wind carried only static and the faint hiss of ash. He had come because of a signal, one last attempt to hold the Hydra together before it devoured itself. inside a buried amphitheatre carved into the planet's crust. The air stank of ozone and scorched metal. Once it had been a command nexus, filled with rows of strategium pits and data altars. Now it was a war camp. Dozens of cells had gathered under flickering lumen strips, their banners blank, armor stripped of insignia. They moved like predators circling each other, voices low and clipped. Alfarius saw tension in every stance, weapons held just shy of readiness. The Hydra had called itself to its own heart, but had not decided if it came to reconcile or to kill. He walked among them without mask or herald, sea-green armor dulled by dust. Heads turned as he passed. Some eyes showed recognition, others doubt, a few open hostility. He could feel the network of loyalties fraying like a rope pulled from both ends. This conclave was supposed to decide a new strategy after the veiled corridor. Instead, it had become a trial, each cell accusing the others of hidden agendas, each believing itself betrayed. At the center of the amphitheater, a circle had been marked with glowing runes. Hydra heads arranged outward, their mouths open. It was both a ritual space and a dueling ground. Erin stood at one edge, helm under her arm, expression taut but resolute. Orest from the ciphered forge stood opposite, his gauntlets smeared with oil and ash. Around them, operatives murmured, some backing Erin's decentralized vision, others calling for a return to command. Between them lay the circle like a wound. Alfarius entered the circle, raising one hand for silence. "This is not a war," he said quietly. "Not yet, but you are close to making it one." His voice carried, as it always had, a thread binding disparate minds. For a heartbeat, the murmurs stilled. Orest stepped forward. "You gave us freedom at the corridor," he said. "But freedom without direction is drift. Cells act at cross purposes. Our gains crumble. We need a center again. We need you." Erin's voice cut through like a blade. "No, we need resilience, not hierarchy. The corridor proved we can act without a master. Only by shedding the old chains can we become more than a weapon." Murmurs rose again, echoing off the amphitheater walls. Alfarius felt the coil tighten around him. He looked from one to the other. "You are both right," he said softly, "and both blind." He told them of what he had seen at the ciphered forge, the sleeper myths turning on their creators, the memory engine pulsing with a design not his own. He spoke of the danger beyond the Imperium, of tides rising in the warp and alien empires sharpening their claws. "We stand at a brink," he said. "If we splinter now, we are lost. If we return to old obedience, we become brittle. Either way, we break." Silence settled, heavy and electric. Then Orest stepped closer, eyes glinting. "Then what do you propose? Another mask? Another labyrinth?" Alfarius looked at the runes underfoot. "A choice," he said. "Not mine. Yours." He removed his helm and placed it at the circle's center. "I built the Hydra to survive me. If it can't, then it deserves to die. Decide here. Follow me, or follow yourselves. But do it with your eyes open." Erin's gaze flickered between him and the gathered cells. "And if the choice is neither, then I walk away," he said simply. The amphitheater held its breath. Operatives shifted, some reaching for weapons, others for data slates. The old instinct to strike first crackled like static. Alfarius felt it in his bones, the moment when a legion might either transform or tear itself apart. He remembered the first time he had spoken to recruits about anonymity, how their faces had shone with belief. That belief was gone, but something else might be born here, if he let it. Oris drew a blade, lowering it point first to the ground. "If we are to follow you," he said, "then take command now. End this debate." Erin stepped opposite him, empty-handed. "If we are to be free, then we must prove it. No more masters. No more hidden hands." The two stared at each other across the circle. Alpharius realized with a jolt that they were not simply debating. They were ready to duel for the Legion's soul. If they fought, the amphitheatre would erupt. The Hydra would devour itself in earnest. He moved between them, unarmed. "No," he said, "not like this." Oris' blade hovered near his chest. "Step aside." "Strike me then," Alpharius said. "Make me your first kill." For a heartbeat, no one moved. The amphitheatre's lumens flickered, casting shadows like serpents writhing on the walls. Alpharius stood very still, feeling the weight of their eyes. In that stillness, he understood something he had avoided for centuries. The Hydra was not his to save. It had to choose its own shape, even if that meant his death. Slowly, Orest lowered the blade. "We don't want to kill you," he said, voice rough. "And I don't want to command you," Alpharius replied. "But we must decide now. Are we one legion or many?" Erin stepped forward. "We are many," she said softly, "but we can still be one if we choose cooperation over obedience." Murmurs rippled, not hostile now, but uncertain. Alpharius saw weapons lower, data links activate, operatives glancing at one another instead of him. The tension thinned like a drawn wire easing. He stepped back, letting them speak, letting the network weave itself. For hours, the amphitheatre became a hive of murmured negotiations. Old rivalries aired and reframed, cells proposing new protocols. No single leader emerged, but a pattern took shape. Shared intelligence nodes, rotating coordinators, open channels instead of sealed cells. Fragile, imperfect, but alive. When at last the murmurs subsided, Erin turned to him. "We will try it," she said. "No master, no head, but still a Hydra." Alpharius inclined his head. "Then I will be one voice among many." Orest sheathed his blade. "We will hold you to that." The lumen steadied, casting the amphitheatre in a softer light. Alpharius looked up at the scratched Hydra on the wall. It seemed less like a wound now and more like an opening. He felt no triumph, only a weary clarity. The legion he had built was dying, but something else might be born in its place, something he could not predict, only influence. He retrieved his helm and left the circle. Outside, the blue sun sagged lower, its light spilling across the planet's glassy plains. He stood at the edge of the landing platform, watching the wind scatter ash like grey snow. For the first time in centuries, he felt neither hunter nor puppet master, but a participant in a story he could no longer script. As his shuttle lifted, he looked back at the amphitheatre shrinking below. He whispered a line from an old training catechism, words almost lost to memory. "A serpent with many heads must learn to dance." The words vanished into the shuttle's hum. Ahead lay the galaxy, imperial fleets, alien predators, and the long shadow of consequences. The Hydra had chosen, but its choice was only the beginning. The veiled corridor had emptied, leaving nothing but drifting wreckage and echoes of ion trails. Alpharius's pod slipped through the dark, unmarked by any transponder, carrying him toward the shadowed expanse, a region of space where stars were dimmed by ancient warp eddies and gravity wells tangled like nets. It was here, in the emptiness, that he would witness the Hydra in its most dangerous form, a legion unbound by a master, yet still pulsing with coordinated life. The weight of what might unfold pressed on him like a tide, yet he allowed no tremor to show in his movements. He docked at a long abandoned station orbiting a blackened moon. The structure had once been a way station for secret communications, now reduced to skeletal corridors lined with frost and dust. Alfarius moved through them without helmet, allowing his presence to be sensed only as a shadow. The signal that had brought him here flickered faintly on the hollow displays, a call from a sleeper cell acting without orders. Someone was orchestrating a convergence, drawing operatives from multiple sectors to a single location. The pattern was deliberate, the stakes unmistakable. Either unity without command would hold, or the Hydra would fracture into blood and fire. Inside the station, he found the first of the cells. They were not uniform. Some had adopted Legion armor, others local disguises. Weapons were laid down, but the tension in their postures betrayed readiness. Alfarius studied them, noting the familiar reflexes honed through decades of training, the way their eyes scanned for flanking, the subtle gestures of coordination. These were operatives who had once obeyed blindly, now improvising with a cohesion he had never taught. For a moment, he wondered whether the Hydra had truly outgrown him. A projection flickered to life in the center of the chamber, revealing Irene. She stood among the gathered cells, her expression calm yet resolute. "We move as one, not under command," she said. "Every choice is shared, every risk weighed collectively. The corridor taught us, the forge empowered us, and now we act without a master's hand." Alfarius's gaze swept across the room. The operatives were tense but poised, their network evident in subtle gestures and micro-signals. The Hydra had become a distributed intelligence, a web with no singular node. "And if this network fails," he asked softly. "Then we will fail together," Irene replied, "but at least we will fail free." He moved among the ranks, feeling the pulse of the operation like a physical presence. Reports from sleeper cultures flickered on the hollow displays, cells moving along prearranged paths, psychic operatives freed from black ships communicating in bursts of thought. Alfarius recognized some of the pathways he had drawn decades ago, now repurposed, altered, and improved. The Hydra was alive, and it was learning from itself. A sudden pulse from the station's outer sensors drew his attention. The War Master's fleet had tracked fragments of the escaped convoy, converging on the expanse with precision. Alfarius did not raise his weapon. He had anticipated this. Instead, he tapped a sequence into the station's guidance array. Hidden deflector mines activated, creating phantom vectors that masked the Hydra's actual position. When the enemy arrived, they would see a dozen false targets, none of which carried the truth. He turned to Irene. "This is a test," he said quietly. "Every maneuver, every decision, now belongs to you." She nodded, sending micro-signals across the chamber. The cells moved with precise coordination, deploying stealth pods, activating local gravity wells, and rerouting warp distortions to confuse sensors. Alfarius watched as the Hydra executed the operation without his intervention, each head acting independently yet harmoniously. The War Master's fleet entered the expanse. From the station's viewing ports, Alfarius saw torpedoes and energy lances launched at phantom coordinates. The real pods slipped silently along hidden paths, escorting liberated prisoners and critical operatives. A pulse of satisfaction ran through him, tempered by the knowledge that the Hydra's autonomy carried immense risk. One miscalculation could unravel the network entirely. He moved to the central hollow display, tracing the paths of each operative. The network's fractal pattern shimmered like a living serpent, its coils twisting around threats and opportunities alike. Alfarius realized that this was the first time he had witnessed his creation act without a master's intervention, and it had survived, not perfectly, but resiliently, adapting to challenges he could not have predicted. A low rumble echoed through the station. The War Master's ships had detected an anomaly, redirecting fire toward empty space. Alfarius allowed the cells to execute a secondary plan. Electromagnetic pulses disrupted targeting arrays, while stealth pods jettisoned decoys into warp shadows. The engagement became a dance of shadows and reflections, the Hydra operating as one organism despite being leaderless. Erin turned to him again. "Do you see? We are not fracturing. We are evolving." Alfarius studied the projection, seeing determination and clarity in her eyes. For centuries, he had shaped loyalty, obedience, and deception. Now he observed freedom, not chaos, emerging from the pattern he had seeded. The realization was both exhilarating and sobering. He withdrew to a private chamber, letting the cells continue without his presence. The station hummed with activity, every action a testament to the Hydra's new form. Alfarius placed a palm on the wall, feeling vibrations that were both familiar and alien. The Hydra was no longer a tool. It was an autonomous entity, capable of making decisions, learning from mistakes, and surviving without a master's hand. As he stared out the viewport at the veiled stars, he reflected on the cost. Countless operatives trained, erased, or sacrificed. Sleeper cultures shaped and reshaped. Entire fleets maneuvered into battle without awareness of their true purpose. Yet in the chaos, a fragile order had emerged. Perhaps this was the evolution he had always intended but never dared to permit. The War Master's fleet faltered, misled by the decoys and countermeasures. Alfarius allowed himself a faint nod. The Hydra had acted, survived, and achieved its objective. He felt neither pride nor relief, only a quiet recognition of inevitability. The legion he had built was no longer his, and yet it had endured. He exhaled slowly, letting the tension in his shoulders ease. The expanse stretched out before him, dark and infinite. Alfarius knew that this operation was only the beginning. The Hydra would continue to test itself, confront challenges, and evolve. And he, for the first time in centuries, would observe without interference, a witness to the life of a creation beyond his command. The station thrummed with quiet activity, a network alive and autonomous. Alfarius closed his eyes, whispering the old catechism under his breath. The serpent moves in shadows, but even shadows must breathe. Beyond the viewport, the stars awaited, indifferent and eternal, as the Hydra took its first true steps into a freedom that no master could command. The blackened horizon of the Persian abyss spread before Alfarius like a wound in the galaxy. Fissures of dying stars and drifting wreckage etched in cold light. Ahead, the combined Hydra cells converged on a cluster of fortified worlds, each holding fleets, psychers, and operatives whose loyalties were uncertain. Alfarius stood on the bridge of his strike craft, eyes scanning the hololithic map. Every pulse of data was a decision, a heartbeat, a potential betrayal. The time had come to confront the consequences of freedom, the first true test of a legion acting without a singular master. Irene appeared as a ghostly projection beside him. "They are ready," she said, her voice calm but edged with tension. "We will strike as one, but there will be casualties. Some will doubt, some will fall, some will betray." Alfarius studied the sector's map. Clusters of light marked fleets and psychers, each moving according to protocols he had once written and abandoned. The convergence was not chaotic. It was deliberate, precise, and terrifyingly adaptive. The Hydra had learned to weave its own decisions, and now it would have to face the galaxy's response. "Then we proceed," he said quietly. "Not as master and servant, but as participants. We do this together, or we do not do it at all." The first fleet to engage was a loyalist detachment, unaware that the Alpha Legion's hand had shaped events to bring them here. Sensors detected them emerging from warp, hulls gleaming against the void. Alfarius activated his stealth field, letting his craft blend with the darkness. Through the network, he sent signals to the autonomous cells. "Engage, contain. Do not annihilate unless necessary. Observe loyalty. Observe intent." As the battle began, the corridors of space became a web of light and shadow. Projectiles flared and dissolved against shields. Psychers twisted reality to protect convoys, and operatives executed maneuvers without a central command. Alfarius watched as cells acted independently, yet harmoniously, improvising strategies he had never taught. Some intercepted enemy boarding parties with surgical precision. Others diverted warp energy to create false vectors. Every move was a reflection of the Hydra's new intelligence, a living organism grown from his designs. Yet among the success, flaws appeared. One cell misinterpreted a signal, nearly triggering a collision with another. Alfarius felt a familiar surge of tension, the same he had felt when first commanding real operatives decades ago. The Hydra's freedom carried risk, and mistakes now bore consequences on a galactic scale. He tapped into the net, sending clarifications, not commands, allowing them to self-correct. Irene's projection shifted closer. "We are losing cohesion in Quadrant 7, she said. "The rogue psyker is acting unpredictably. Should we intervene?" Alfarius considered the question. Intervention could regain control, but it would undermine the autonomy he had cultivated. Instead, he transmitted a subtle suggestion, encoded as a choice rather than an order. "Offer guidance, not governance. Let them decide if the path is safe. Observe the result." Through the viewport, he saw the rogue psyker, a young operative freed from a black ship, trembling with power, attempting to warp reality around the convoy. Instead of crushing him, the Hydra cells adapted, creating a lattice of psychic feedback that channeled his abilities into protective fields. Alfarius felt a flicker of pride and unease. The Hydra was alive, self-correcting, and he was no longer in control. A sudden alert flashed across the hololithic map. Enemy reinforcements, a squadron of mechanized warships, approached from the outer corridor. Alfarius leaned forward, studying the vectors. Without hesitation, he tapped the signal into the network. "Contain and distract. Observe initiative." The cell split, diverting energy and ships to intercept while leaving the convoy unscathed. It was chaos managed, not by a single mind, but by many acting in concert. Despite the success, he felt the weight of every life in the operation. Boarding casualties, psychers destabilized, convoys damaged. Freedom carried its cost. Alfarius recalled the first time he had watched a cell die in training, how he had rationalized necessity. Now necessity had multiplied 1,000-fold. He closed his eyes for a brief instant, feeling the sting of centuries, the ghosts of all those who had followed him blindly, and the risk of all who now acted freely. Erin's voice cut through his reverie. "We have secured the convoy. Enemy fleet is contained. Casualties are minimal given the scale." Alfarius opened his eyes, scanning the hololithic projection. The map pulsed, showing every cell, every operative, every decision thread. The Hydra had survived the first real battle without a master's hand. It had adapted, corrected, and preserved what mattered most. Cohesion without obedience, initiative without fear. He allowed himself a rare smile tinged with melancholy. "Then the Hydra lives," he said quietly, "and so do we, in a new way." A final transmission appeared on the network, a signal he had not sent, encoded in his own patterns. It was simple. Coordinates leading to a hidden system, a message embedded with a single line of code. The first reckoning has begun. Alfarius felt a shiver pass through him. The Hydra's survival had not ended the challenge. It had only drawn back the veil on the true test, a confrontation that would demand loyalty, sacrifice, and revelation from all its heads. He looked out through the viewport at the stars, their light fractured by warp eddies. The galaxy would never see the Hydra as it truly was, a legion evolving beyond its master, carrying his legacy, yet rewriting it in real time. Alfarius knew that the coming days would force choices heavier than any battle he had commanded, choices that could shatter the legion or elevate it to something neither wholly obedient nor wholly free. He straightened, eyes narrowing. "Then let the reckoning begin," he whispered. Outside, the stars stretched into infinite black, and the Hydra moved forward, leaderless, alive, and ready to face the universe on its own terms. The fractured fleets of the Persian expanse converged again, but this time the tension was different, no longer a test of coordination or survival. The confrontation was a reckoning. Alfarius's strike craft hovered at the edge of a system scarred by centuries of forgotten wars. Moons hung like fractured mirrors, reflecting the scattered light of distant suns. Around him, autonomous Hydra cells prepared for the engagement that would determine not only the fate of the convoy, but the future of the Legion itself. Every pulse, every flicker of energy, carried the weight of choices already made and consequences yet to unfold. Erin's projection appeared beside him, her expression taut with resolve. "The Rogue Warmaster has consolidated his forces. He expects us to act as we always did, with deception, with a single hand guiding the network. He does not know we no longer follow." Alfarius nodded. "Then we will show him something he cannot predict." He opened the secure channel to the converging cells. No commands, only signals. Their network hummed in response, adapting, shifting, balancing chaos with intent. The Hydra had grown beyond instruction, and now he would witness the full measure of its autonomy. The first wave struck. Stealth pods emerged from warp shadows, not in formation, but dispersed according to the decisions of each independent cell. Boarding teams engaged enemy vessels, disabling weapons and scrambling communications. Alfarius watched through the viewport as the operation unfolded like a living organism, each head of the Hydra acting in concert without a central brain. For the first time, he felt a distant pride. The Legion he had built could survive, even flourish, without him orchestrating every move. Yet the reckoning was not without cost. One boarding pod miscalculated, encountering an unexpected trap laid by the Warmaster. Energy arcs flared, tearing through hull plating. Alfarius felt the tremor in his craft, as if the shock had reached him through the void. The cell's operator managed to redirect the warp drive core to cushion the blow, saving most of the team. But casualties were inevitable. Erin's voice cut in, calm but firm. "Adapt, compensate, preserve the network." He allowed them to act, observing rather than commanding. The Hydra responded, rerouting power, activating countermeasures, improvising in ways he could not have anticipated. A rogue psyker aboard an enemy vessel attempted a psychic strike, but it was anticipated, countered by coordinated feedback from multiple cells. Alfarius realized that the Legion had become more than he had imagined. Not just a collection of operatives, but a collective intelligence capable of reasoning, anticipating, and surviving. From the periphery, the Warmaster's fleet attempted to regroup, targeting perceived weaknesses. Alfarius engaged the ship's tactical interface, overlaying simulated vectors and probabilities, but he intervened only minimally. The Hydra was acting, thinking, learning without his guidance. The difference between survival and collapse rested on the decisions of many, not the hand of one. In the chaos, Erin coordinated a diversion. She led a small contingent to disable a cluster of heavy turrets, drawing the Warmaster's attention while other cells extracted prisoners. Alfarius watched her actions unfold with the precision of a conductor, yet she was conducting herself, not following his baton. This was evolution, autonomy tempered by shared memory. A sudden alert flared on the display. The Warmaster had deployed a concealed warp minefield, one capable of erasing ships in moments. Alfarius's instincts screamed to override the network and reroute the cells. He hesitated, feeling the familiar tension of command. But then he realized they could respond themselves. He transmitted only data, a set of environmental readings, allowing the cells to interpret and act. Each cell chose a path, recalculated trajectories, and navigated the minefield without a single collision. The convoy's extraction began. Pods carrying prisoners moved along independently calculated routes, shields modulating to avoid enemy scans. Alfarius felt a flicker of awe. He had trained them for obedience, yet they now demonstrated judgment, foresight, and improvisation beyond his design. Still, the operation was fragile. One misstep could undo everything. The reckoning was not simply against an enemy, but against the limitations of autonomy itself. Suddenly, the Warmaster's flagship emerged from warp, a monstrous silhouette bristling with weapons and psychic amplifiers. Alfarius watched as the Hydra cells adapted instantly, splitting focus, drawing fire, countering psychic attacks with layered feedback. The flagship's hull shimmered with energy shields, but coordinated strikes from multiple cells pierced them in sequence. Alfarius noted the efficiency of the assault. Deadly, precise, and entirely unplanned by him. In the midst of this, a rogue operative attempted to seize a prisoner for personal gain. Erin intercepted, not with force, but by re-establishing data link coordination, demonstrating the network's self-regulating nature. Alfarius realized that the Hydra now contained internal checks, a resilience born of necessity and autonomy. The Warmaster, seeing the operation's cohesion despite absence of a central command, faltered. His fleet hesitated, unable to interpret the Legion's actions. Alfarius allowed a rare smile. The Hydra was alive, adaptive, and deadly without his hand guiding every strike. Yet the knowledge came with unease. If the Hydra could operate without him in success, it could also fail spectacularly in unforeseen circumstances. As the last pods cleared the danger zone, Alfarius engaged minimal thrust to follow their retreat. The Warmaster's fleet remained in disarray, scattered and unable to pursue efficiently. Alfarius's eyes swept the expanse, noting the cost. Minor casualties, damaged vessels, but the convoy secured. The Hydra had proven capable, and yet the question lingered. How long before autonomy bred ambition or miscalculation? He allowed the cells to disperse back into the void, each returning to prearranged safe points. Alfarius remained in the center of his strike craft, reflecting on the operation. The Hydra had survived the first real test of self-governance. It had adapted, overcome, and preserved its objective. For the first time, he had not steered the outcome, yet it had succeeded. Irene's projection appeared beside him once more. "We did it," she said softly, "without you dictating, without interference." Alfarius nodded, feeling a mixture of relief and foreboding. "Yes, but this is only the beginning. The reckoning continues, not against the Imperium, but against ourselves." He stared out into the abyss, watching stars bend through warp distortions. The Hydra had chosen, acted, and survived. Now it would have to confront the consequences of that choice. Alfarius exhaled slowly, whispering under his breath, "Autonomy carries its own cost, and yet it lives." Beyond the viewport, the void stretched infinite and indifferent. The Hydra moved forward, leaderless, alive, and facing a reckoning that no single hand could control. Alfarius leaned back, letting the pulse of the networks wash over him, understanding that the operation had not ended in victory or defeat, but in evolution. The Legion had survived, and the future waited for no master. The remnants of the Persian expanse lay scattered like shattered glass beneath the pale light of dying stars. Alfarius's strike craft drifted above the ghost of a battlefield where shadows of fleets lingered longer than their hulls. Silence reigned, thick and heavy, carrying the weight of countless choices, betrayals, and lives shaped or destroyed by the Hydra. He looked down on the void, feeling its emptiness echo the fracture that had become his Legion. The operation, the reckoning, the battles, everything had led to this moment of closure, a juncture between survival and dissolution, between legacy and oblivion. Inside the craft, Alfarius stood alone, the hum of gravitic engines vibrating beneath his boots. He thought of the garden world, the ciphered forge, the veiled corridor and Tigres, the scattered chapters of his own design now converging into a single, inescapable truth. The Hydra had survived without him as its master, had acted without his hand guiding it, had adapted and improvised in ways he had neither foreseen nor authorized. And yet, survival carried consequences. Freedom, autonomy, the very essence of the Legion now pressed against the limits of its own cohesion. The hololithic map before him pulsed with the last traces of autonomous cells, each a glowing node in a pattern he had once imagined as under his absolute control. He traced the paths of operatives who had once obeyed blindly, now weaving decisions that might either save the Legion or shatter it entirely. A pulse of dread travelled along his spine. He realized, with a clarity that hurt, that he could not reclaim the Legion without destroying the very autonomy that had ensured its survival. To intervene now would be to unravel the Hydra entirely. To remain apart was to witness its evolution. He exhaled slowly, hands pressed against the holodisplay, feeling the cold pulse of data like blood in a vein. A memory surfaced, the first lesson he had taught his recruits in the Chemos vaults, the words he had repeated for centuries. The serpent cannot be held by the tail alone. It moves as a whole, and its head may be many. He had never truly believed them until now. The Hydra had become its own head, or rather, many heads, each thinking, acting, surviving. He wondered what it had learned from him, and what he had forgotten in the process. A soft chime interrupted his reflection. A projection flickered into existence. Erin, her visage calm but unreadable. "They have gathered," she said. "All cells report readiness. The liberated psychers and convoys are secure. The network is stable, though fractured. Alpharius nodded, feeling a hollow sort of pride. Then the Hydra endures, he murmured. Endures, yes, she said, but not as you intended. You gave them freedom, and they chose it over obedience. The cost has been measured, and the cost is high. Casualties among operatives, strained links, and the burden of independence weigh heavily. Yet they move forward. He turned from the projection, staring out through the viewport at the scattering of systems below. The stars seemed distant, indifferent witnesses to his centuries-long stewardship. He thought of those who had sacrificed themselves for secrets he had deemed necessary, of operatives who had vanished without trace, and of the hundreds of worlds that had been shaped by his designs. The Legion had survived, but at the price of his absolute control, and perhaps of his own relevance. He moved to the side of the command chamber, letting his hands trail across the console. Each press of a key could send orders, override systems, reclaim authority. Yet he refrained. To do so now would undo the lessons, the evolution, the survival of the Hydra. He felt a strange weight lift from his shoulders and fall heavier onto his chest. The Legion was no longer his to command. It had grown beyond the scope of a single mind. Outside, a cluster of liberated psychers floated along prearranged trajectories, guided by the network of cells. Alpharius observed them, recognizing the precision and the improvisation, the harmony achieved without a master's voice. The effectiveness of the operation was undeniable, yet he could not shake the hollow ache of absence of command, of certainty, of the old familiar sense of being the architect. A soft vibration underfoot signaled a message through the network. Alpharius opened it. A single line of code appeared. The serpent moves beyond the hand. No signature, no instructions. Only the truth he had known but avoided. The Hydra's autonomy was irreversible. He allowed the message to linger in the display, a reminder that the Legion had become its own organism, capable of thought, action, and consequence beyond his control. Erin's voice returned through the projection. You are not needed to guide them anymore, but your presence ensures stability, if only in witness. The choice is yours. Continue to observe, or intervene and risk unraveling everything. Alpharius exhaled, his gaze falling to the dark expanse below. Intervention would assert control, but at the cost of autonomy and trust. Observation, however, allowed the Hydra to live, adapt, and perhaps endure. He had built an empire of shadows and whispers. Now he would accept its evolution without interference. He seated himself, closing his eyes briefly. Memories of centuries past drifted through his mind. First recruits, first operations, the countless simulations, the betrayals, and the triumphs. The Hydra had survived each test, adapted to each challenge, and now faced a future he could only watch unfold. His immortality had granted him knowledge, but the Legion's independence had granted it life. Outside, the void was infinite and cold. Alpharius whispered to no one. The serpent sheds its skin, but not its memory. It moves, it adapts, and it survives. The words were both affirmation and farewell. He had shaped the Hydra to endure without him, and in doing so, had released it from the bonds of his authority. The stars flickered in the distance, indifferent witnesses to the end of an era and the birth of a new order. Alpharius remained silent, observing as the network dispersed through the sector, each cell a pulse of life and potential. The Legion would continue, leaderless yet cohesive, autonomous yet loyal to the memory of its architect. He felt neither triumph nor despair, only the weight and relief of inevitability. As the command chamber dimmed, he allowed himself a final reflection. Centuries of deception, secrecy, and design had culminated not in control, but in freedom, the Hydra's true evolution. He would carry the cost of creation, the knowledge of lives shaped and lost, but he would not intervene further. The Legion had chosen, and so had he, by stepping aside. Alpharius rose, looking out into the void one last time. He whispered under his breath, "The Hydra moves, and the galaxy will learn to follow its coils, not by a hand, but by its own design." The stars stretched into the infinite dark, the last echoes of an era fading as a new one quietly began.